Norco is a 2022 point-and-click adventure game developed by Geography of Robots. Point-and-click adventure, you say? Isn't that a bit out of character for your channel? Well, yes. I might as well kick things off with a confession. I'm not what you would call a point-and-click adventure fan. My experience with this genre is limited to the Sam & Max series, both the 1993 classic and the Telltale reboot, one half of a Siberia game, and maybe the first Monkey Island. I've been avoiding point-and-click adventures for my entire life, and the reason is simple. I don't like puzzles. No matter how hard I try, my brain is just not wired for point-and-click adventures. I guess I'm intellectually incapable of meeting these games halfway and abiding by their twisted logic. I know the adventure genre has long moved past the game design tropes of the 90s and early 2000s, meaning the exact things that put me off these games, but I couldn't shake off this mental blockage. Norco may have converted me. Look, I'm not saying that I'ma go balls deep into LucasArts' entire point-and-click adventure library straight after Norco, rather that Norco showed me what I've been missing out by stubbornly avoiding an entire genre of games just because puzzle give brain boo-boo. Norco is just so... I don't even know, man. It made me feel things and think things that I never thought I could feel and think. Just the mere attempt of articulating my thoughts about Norco causes my already shoddy and convoluted writing to collapse under its own weight, and nothing I'd say would even come close to doing this game justice. But let's give it a try anyway. So in this video I will share my thoughts about Norco's writing, themes, world building and gameplay stream of consciousness style, but to a higher degree than usual. Don't worry, I will avoid talking about Norco's story because I really want you to purchase and play this game. Like, now. I'm serious. Stop this video, go to your preferred digital store and hit that motherfucking purchase button like your life depends on it. I don't even care about swearing in the no swear zone, that's how serious I am. I'll be waiting. Since we are in CTA town and you're hopefully inputting the security code in the store's checkout, I may as well plug my socials. I got a Twitter where 280 character or so tweets happen, and a Patreon where you can support the channel with real life money. Let's get to it. Norco is set in an alternate near-future version of Norco, a small industrial town situated in the bayous of Louisiana. The story follows Kay, a woman in her early 20s who has returned to Norco to settle the affairs of her recently deceased mother. This is not your typical disillusioned college dropout who returns to their hometown to find themselves coming of age type of story. Kay has actually returned to Norco after years on the road, fighting with militias, sleeping in nuclear tunnels, doing odd jobs to make ends meet, like repairing weapons and engines for state fugitives in an increasingly oppressive and anarchic United States. Kay is not exactly your regular American young adult. Or maybe she's as typical as someone her age could be given the state of the world she inhabits. A fragile, mid-tech, low-life world where a meme can spark a war which leads to the collapse of a major city and one of the most powerful countries on the planet. This is not a metaphor, it's literally what happened to Albuquerque, where Kay narrowly escaped a pop-up military junta which set the city on fire and slaughtered everyone. That's the kind of life Kay leads, and still she's not too keen on returning to Norco, which compared to the rest of the United States seems like paradise. So what makes Norco so off-putting in Kay's eyes? Well, apart from being the literal urban embodiment of her tumultuous childhood marked by an unstable home life, a well-intentioned but distant mother, and a troubled, unstable brother. You see, Norco is a bit of a dump. A dreary, polluted, humid industrial swamp, both in the literal and figurative sense, that sits in the shadow of a sprawling petrochemical facility owned by the ominously called Shield Corporation. Interestingly, its namesake, because yes, Norco is an actual place, is not that far off from its fictional counterpart. In real life, Norco is not a town, but the census-designated place in St. Charles Parish, Louisiana, that is home to a major Shell petroleum refinery. Just under 3,000 2,000 people live in this place, most of which I assume are employed by the refinery in some capacity. This city, I'm gonna call it a city from now on for simplicity's sake, and the industry it is serving are so symbiotic that even its name, Norco, is derived from New Orleans Refining Company. Just like S.H.I.E.L.D. in the fictional Norco, Shell is master of the area in the real Norco, possessing the kind of social and economic clout only a multinational corporation operating in a small town possesses. I highly recommend checking out this New Yorker article. It goes into the history of Norco, its relationship with the Shell Corporation, and how one of the developers drew from these things when creating Norco the game. Because what do you know, Yutz, the creator of Norco, grew up there. I'm not gonna go through everything, but what I found interesting was how they related emotionally and intellectually as a kid to this giant industrial behemoth dominating the landscape. He confessed to a bizarre fascination with it, likening it to a dragon, a concept to which I can totally relate to. I grew up in a mid-sized post-industrial port city. I remember walking alongside the port as a kid and being in awe of the industrial machinery, watching it do its thing with a combination of fear and childhood curiosity. I also remember being struck, again in a childhood sort of way because I was obviously too young to know all this stuff, by the contrast between the port and the city itself, which contained its own anachronistic mix of old-timey architecture and Soviet brutalism. Look, I know it's not quite like what Yutz experienced, but hey, I told you this game made me think things I never thought I'd think. Anyways, in the same New Yorker article, the reporter recalls pulling their phone out of professional reflex to snap a few photos of the Shell refinery, only to have a security guard demand they hand them their phone. In their stupor, they almost caved. After which they realized that, hey, actually they were fully within their right to take pictures on public land. It's not like they were taking selfies with a nuclear submarine, right? Half an hour later, a sheriff's deputy interrupted their interview with the same demand. Quote, "I wasn't breaking any laws, but borrowed my driver's license anyway. Not for any official reason," he apologetically explained, "but to make a copy for Shell's national security database." End quote. So, yeah. Pretty fucked up. So for Norco, Geography of Robots drew from both the local realities of its namesake and current day social and political anxieties and asked, what if everything was exactly as it is now, but way worse? What if corporations had enough power to basically do whatever they wanted in the communities they operated in, buying off entire neighborhoods below market rate to expand in that area and flooding the people who resisted, recklessly poisoning locals with toxic fumes and all manner of pollutants in the name of profit, forcing local communities into a dynamic of economic subservience? What if the gig economy became the economy? What if social media sucked even more? What if a fucking meme would be enough to mobilize militias to attack a modern metropolis? That's the world of Norco. I wouldn't say it's exactly a one-to-one mirror of our world taken to the extreme, but it could be. Despite the sorry state of his world, Norco is not a work of dystopian fiction, at least in the eyes of its creator, and I tend to agree with them. Underneath all the doom and gloom of Norco, there is a glimmer of hope. You just have to look for it. Plus, this game is way more than its light cyberpunkish dystopian but not really dystopian world. But I'll save all that for the writing and themes section. You might have noticed from the footage shown so far that Norco is a very pretty looking game. Its pixel art aesthetic fits Norco's mood and atmosphere like a glove. Initially, Norco wasn't even conceptualized as a game. It actually grew out of a multimedia documentary by Yutz and a friend, which was about the impact of Hurricane Katrina on Louisiana and its landscape. The project incorporated a plethora of documentation methods, like writing, interviews, and various audio-visual components which, yes, included pixel art. Yutz would carry a disposable camera with him on his travels in Louisiana and use the pictures he took as basis for pixel art landscapes, which he'd then post on Tumblr, which in time gained a sizable cult following. At that point, a video game was the next logical step towards taking this project, namely documenting this hyper-localized facet of Louisiana culture through novel methods to the next level. In other words, Norco the game was the natural evolution of a universe Yates had already sketched through his vivid pixel art. I find this extremely interesting, how one's artistic pursuits can lead them on paths they'd never anticipated. Obviously, there is more to Norco's aesthetic than its cross-media origins. It also helps that it's lush in detail and bursting with personality. Norco's pre-apocalyptic landscapes tell their own story of a world on the brink of environmental disaster whose inhabitants, crushed under the weight of social and economic insecurity, barely get by. Norco doesn't waste any space. Every pixel of real estate is used to convey something, whether as abstract as a mood or a piece of environmental storytelling, and to great effect. I love how the game plays with visual contrasts to enhance its storytelling. Take Kay's childhood bedroom for example. You'll notice the warm colors and the idealized, picturesque vibe of this space. It looks like a space stuck in limbo, left exactly as it was following the departure of its former occupant, which is a thing many parents do when their children move out. Now compare Kay's room with the rest of the house, where her late mother spent her time. Yeah, it's a totally different mood. From light-hearted nostalgia to melancholia with just a click. You probably know by this point that I have a bizarre affinity for analyzing living spaces. That's because I'm a firm believer that the state of a person's living space is a window into their, and excuse me for my corniness, but I can't help myself, soul. You do get to play as Kay mother later in the game, but you never visit the house as her, which I am sure was on purpose. By playing as Catherine, you are made privy to the rebellious side, the badass local historian who, even in the final stages of her illness, somehow found the strength to continue her research. Seeing her living space through Kay's eyes was meant to show the toll that took on Catherine's psyche. Anyway, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Kay and Catherine's relationship is very well fleshed out in this game, so I'm gonna stop here to avoid spoilers. I'm just in awe of how Geography of Robots managed to convey this estranged daughter-absent mother dynamic through visuals alone. I just realized that I've talked more about what the visuals are trying to convey than the pixel art itself, but trust me, these two things are deeply intertwined. Now, visuals are not the only area where Norco excels. The soundtrack and really the sound design in general are absolutely killer. Do you like moody, melancholia-oozing synths and electronica infused with just a touch of jazz? Ever wondered how American Football's self-titled debut album would sound like if they made electronic music instead of emo/shoegaze/math rock? This is your game. Norco's soundtrack managed to somehow tap into both my love for moody electronic music and Midwestern emo. Insert real emo consists of the DC emotional hardcore scene copypasta here. Sonically speaking, Norco has a very pronounced and fleshed out sense of place. You really feel like you're right there, the distant hum of industrial machinery, the inaudible background chatter of New Orleans' French Quarter, even transitional screens where nothing story essential happens got the same level of attention. Like, say, the overpass outside the clinic Catherine visits. I spend minutes just absorbing the whoosh of distant traffic. It speaks volumes about how much good sound design contributes to the atmosphere and feel of a game. The sound design in combination with the incredibly evocative pixel art makes Norco a truly unique experience, one of the most artistically fulfilled video games I've ever played. With one small caveat. Depending on the device you're watching this video on, you might have noticed some interesting visual glitches in the form of juddering. It's mostly visible when something's in motion, like camera movements or characters breathing. I tried forcing VSync and Nvidia control panel and tweaking all manner of settings, but nothing seemed to work. Since Norco doesn't support my laptop's resolution, I assumed the problem was from my end. Still, I eventually reached out to the devs and yeah, I'm not the only person who reported this issue. It seems to be engine related or something like that. Anyways, the devs are hard at work fixing it, it's not a big deal, it didn't affect my enjoyment of the game in any way, but I just wanted to let people know that it's a game related issue. Gameplay wise, Norco is a point and click adventure game with some visual novel elements. You don't control a physical animated character, rather jump from one area to another with a simple click. As for the moment to moment gameplay, it's exactly what you would expect from an adventure game. You click on objects to get blurbs of text and solve most, but not all puzzles by combining objects. And this is where Norco's similarities with its older peers end and the influences of newer games become apparent. So, the mind map. It's basically a quest log doubling as an inventory, storing and visually connecting case scattered thoughts and hypotheses. Looks familiar? It's a mix of Pathologic 2's own mind map and Disco Elysium's thought cabinet, though in Norco it doesn't serve a direct gameplay purpose, other than helping the player keep track of the labyrinthine corporate conspiracy K has to unravel. And it's also a neat, highly visual way to package and deliver story and lore. Initially, I was a bit disappointed that its effects on the gameplay aren't more tangible. There is an achievement for unlocking all the nodes, which in my mind implies the existence of branching paths and content locked depending on player choice. I might be wrong though, let me know in the comments. See what I did there? Engagement, baby. Still, there are some choices you can make throughout the game that have varying degrees of impact on the story. You make these choices either via dialogue or by interacting with the environment. One of my favorite encounters concerns a filmmaking crew shooting a hard-boiled, true detective-style show near a gas station. The director is a condescending piece of trash that treats everybody, including you, like shit. Still, he has the audacity to ask you how people from Norco talk to make his show more authentic. Cause of course he's from out of town and anyone who doesn't conform to his limited worldview is, quote, a redneck. So you can tell him to fuck off or indulge him and watch as he's getting viciously bamboozled. There are tons of other encounters like this one in Norco, not story essential, but it's pretty cool that you can influence small portions of the game through your choices. Speaking of encounters, what if I told you that Norco has a combat system? Yep. You got two combat-themed minigames, one that involves clicking on symbols in a certain sequence, and a QTE. Nothing much to add here apart from the fact that combat is avoidable in most cases. It's nice that the game gives you this option. There is one combat encounter that I recommend you don't avoid. See this angry cat? Try and tame it. Trust me on this one. Since this is a point-and-click adventure after all, I'd be remiss if I didn't touch on the puzzles. So Norco's puzzle design ranges from classic point-and-click adventure, like combine X item with Y thing to get Z result, pixel hunting, to absolutely batshit bonkers out there stuff. Without spoiling anything, there's one puzzle that has you climb up and down the stairs of a government building in pitch darkness and feel your surroundings on certain floors, but you gotta do it in a specific sequence. Finally, I have to commend the devs for the way they integrated cell phones into the puzzle design. Again, I don't want to give anything away, I just wanted to give you a heads up. When it comes to Norco's writing, there are two ways to approach it: the technical, presentational aspects, and the themes and subjects the game explores. A lot to unpack for one section, I know, but just bear with me. So let's start with the former. Here's the thing, it's hard to sell a text-heavy game, or any text-centric media for that matter, in an era when there are literally thousands of pieces of passive media out there just waiting to be passively consumed. I am guilty of this too, I simply don't have the mental energy I once had for reading. Norco, like Disco Elysium, not only acknowledges this reality, but does its best to account for it by making the reading experience as comfortable for the player as possible. How? By mimicking the feel and flow of social media, the thing we spend most of our time on. The text is displayed on either side of the screen, in paragraphs of 2-3 short snappy sentences max each. This approach gives the player enough time to register the information on the screen, as well as enough physical room for the visuals to adequately complement the prose. You really can't tell if the prose was written around the visuals or the reverse. That's how seamlessly they blend with each other. I also have to commend the developers a second time for including options for dialogue font, size and color. You made this aging gamer very happy. I don't think I have to explain just how good the writing is. Every sentence feels like a gut punch, it's that well written and evocative. If I were to place it in a genre, I'd say it's a mix of magical realism and Jeff Vandermeer's take on the new weird. For what it's worth, I'd say Norco leans more into the Jeff Vandermeer camp due to how it tackles the ecological angle. More specifically, flip-flopping between presenting man's impact on the environment in realistic and tangible terms. Stuff like, you know, dumping toxic waste in rivers kills fish, or diverting rivers to expand refineries destroys local ecosystems. And surrealism. One such surreal side story takes place at an experimental puppet show beneath a highway overpass. In it, an alligator whose child was killed by a shrimper asks you to kill the shrimper in exchange for its servitude. You navigate the map from an overhead perspective, and while searching for the shrimper, the alligator shares cryptic anecdotes. Now, I won't spoil the outcome of the story because of course there's more to it, but this short segment is illustrative of the vibe of a large portion of the game. You feel like you're trapped somewhere between dream and reality, as if the pollution, both environmental in the form of corporations plundering the planet for profit, and technological, social media, the corrupt for-profit cloud companies where people upload their memories for the same companies to use for I don't even want to know what, plunged the world into a state of limbo. I wish I had the background to explore Norco's literary influences more deeply, but alas, I'm just a dude who talks about video games, not an academic, and I don't want a little Carmine myself into a corner.
I'm glad you caught that, Alexandra. Very observant. The sacred and the profane.
While I enjoyed Norco's social and political commentary, it's the intimate, personal plot beats I resonated with the most on an emotional level. In the opening segment of Norco, Kay travels back home across a war-torn America while reminiscing about her family and life back in Norco. Here the game offers the first of many opportunities to shape Kay's personality through a seemingly trivial question. How did Kay feel about the noise emanated by the Shield refinery at night? I chose I still can't sleep without that sound on instinct. Later that night, as I was about to fall asleep, that moment crept into my mind and I wondered why I had chosen that option specifically. I dug into my memories until finally, a few hours later, it hit me. When I was a kid, I lived very close to a tram line, far enough to not feel the ground trembling as the tram passed by my house, but close enough to hear its distant hum. And I remember finding that hum very soothing as a kid. Basically white noise that helped me sleep. Even now, pushing 30, I have a weird affinity for riding trams. That epiphany unleashed a flurry of emotions and memories onto me. It's when I realized what Norco is actually about, at least for me, beyond its light cyberpunk world and its social and political commentary. It's a homecoming story. Kay has to return to a place she'd long left to escape her dysfunctional family to settle the affairs of her distant, deceased mother. This place she once called home feels so alien and familiar at the same time. Life carried on while she was away, but her hometown still feels weirdly stagnant. I grew up in a post-industrial port city whose high economic potential has been crippled by corrupt, greedy politicians. They plundered my city for decades, piece by piece, until only a barely functional shell of its hospitality industry has remained. Still, unlike most of my peers who left after graduating high school, and understandably so, I stayed. I figured in my naivete that there has to be more to this city than cracked sidewalks, pharmacies, and gambling dens. I wanted to give it the old college try, which is exactly what I did. Literally. After college, I fucking bolted it myself. I had finally realized that there was nothing left for me there, and I had to make that leap and leave that stagnant and recession-hit place if I hoped to make something of myself. So I packed my shit and never looked back. And you know what's weird? Even though I don't live that far away from my hometown, every time I come back to visit, I feel like a stranger in a place that's fundamentally the same as when I left, but just different enough to make things seem a bit off. My teenage hangouts, mostly bars and improvised skate parks, torn down and turned into new housing, mom and pop shops boarded off, or even worse, converted into food delivery centers, that kiosk where I used to buy cigarettes by the piece, now an electric scooter rack. The old town, a hive of scum and villainy, the likeliest place to get stabbed in my high school days, is now safe. Like, parents can grab a coffee at one of the dozens of chic outdoor bars while watching their kids play safe. Which is good, but so fucking bizarre for me. No other game except maybe Night in the Woods captures this confusing hodgepodge of bittersweet nostalgia, alienation, and melancholia so well. This is what I love the most about Norco and why I think everybody should play it. It's both a very current and sharp commentary on the shit that we're going through as a society, and an exploration of the complicated dynamics between people and the places they grew up in. Thanks for watching. As always, a huge thank you to my wonderful patrons whose generosity makes these videos possible. I'll see you next time.